Did you know they made an entire documentary about JonBenet Ramsey and her killer actually being an alien cult leader? Yes, I'm serious. It was crazy. I watched the whole thing and it was just so bizarre. I want to tell you about it. Especially with like the weirdness of aliens being talked about all the time. It's so wild. It is the craziest theory that I've ever watched on a documentary. So let's get into it, especially because this is one of the biggest unsolved cases in America. Before we get into that, I want to say hit the follow button because I'll be covering the newly released documentary about JonBenet and you won't want to miss that. So let's go. Started out with a former prosecutor talking to the father, John Ramsey, who was once thought to be the main suspect. His whole family actually was. And some people still believe that he is the leading suspect or who actually done the crime. But she starts talking about an alternative tip that they received by a woman named Bernice, who was currently in prison for trying to kill her husband. And the person that she was accusing of being involved in the murder of JonBenet was her husband. She begins to tell this huge story about how he was connected to an alien cult leader in another state and how they would travel back and forth to Colorado, and he was involved in some pretty shady stuff, including trying to kidnap little girls. I'm gonna be reading over the notes that go over the documentary because it's easier. So Bernice Johnson emerged from a prison in Colorado where she was serving time for an attempted murder, saying that JonBenet Ramsey's death was the result of a kidnapping gone wrong. Or Todd Foose, who was the man that she attempted to murder and the father of her child, saw JonBenet Ramsey at a pageant where they had entered their daughter Cinnamon. He had a criminal record and a habit of picking locks and breaking into places and had begun talking about coming into some money. Foose acted in cahoots with Michael Helgoth, who was also a main suspect who had actually committed suicide after one of Alex Hunter's press conferences where he spoke about them getting closer and closer to finding out who the killer was. He was found with a self-inflicted gunshot wound and near him a stun gun and also high-tech boots. A print was found at the crime scene outside of the broken window of the Ramsey home. None of the Ramseys owned a pair of high-tech boots, according to them, so when he did, it was a firm belief that Helgoth was involved in the murder. The Ramseys handed the boots over to the police, but they dismissed it. They said that they were the wrong size of boot, but a friend of Helgoth's said that he firmly believed that he was involved in the crime. And the reason why people don't believe that Michael Helgoth actually unalived himself was because he was right-handed and the gunshot came from the left side at a weird angle and it did not appear to be a suicide. It just didn't. It was weird, it was bizarre, and things were oddly placed throughout the scene, but it was ruled a suicide and kind of dismissed by the police once again. Because he worked with him and he coincidentally had lost one of his most prized possessions, his flashlight. And if you don't know, JonBenet had a huge crack in her skull due to blunt force trauma. It was brutal. It was a horrible, horrible thing. Anyway, Helgoth had told Kennedy that by Christmas, he and a partner were going to make $50,000 to $60,000 each. And in the ransom note that the Ramseys allegedly found, it said that they requested $118,000, which is such a bizarre amount. So when the friend asked Helgoth about the deal after Christmas, he said it had not gone the way that it was supposed to. And then he alleged that Helgoth actually changed his hairstyle completely. His family refused to give DNA samples to. So later on, the FBI that is working on the case, he calls Foose in to interview him, and he is convinced that the dude is sticking to a script. He's looking at his body language, and he is sus. He asked him to give a DNA sample, which he did. So then we go back, and then they begin talking about how Foose was connected to a cult leader named Scott Carruthers. And the woman that alleged all of this or accused them was so convinced that they were involved. She had met Carruthers while he was forming his alien cult, BDX. She says that Carruthers hired Foose to kidnap JonBenet. Dan Fesperman, former Chicago Sun investigative journalist, had written a piece about Carruthers and how he thought that he was an alien. He literally thought he was an alien, and he claimed that Beta Dominion xenophilia was a level of intelligence 39 levels above the White House, and Scott was the earthly leader representative of it. They would communicate to their mothership of the aliens with cats. Cats were the earthly communicators between us and the aliens, apparently. Scott Carruthers would travel to Colorado frequently for business. And Matt Powers, who helped a lot of former BDX members get to their senses, and then explains that Carruthers harvested young girls because women had positive energy. And then he would groom them to become princesses. So John Griffin, his former limousine driver, said that Carruthers went berserk when a third grader by the last name of Hakerman was removed from the cult by her father, who had to go to court to have the child removed from the residence where his ex-wife had gone to live, leaving Mr. Hakerman to join Carruthers in the. And he alleged that Carruthers was a threat to little girls. So he turned him to the police, and they found out that Carruthers was planning to kill several enemies of the BDX, including Tim Hakerman, and to kidnap one of their enemies' granddaughters. So he had even hired a hitman to do that. Meanwhile, John Ramsey, he feels the theory is compelling. He doesn't seem exactly sold on it throughout, but he's kind of, not brushing it off. Because he was also showed a photo of John Foose and said that he remembered him being at the same pageants that JonBenet was entered into as a child. He remembered his daughter, Cinnamon, winning a grand prize and saying that Foose acted like he had just won the Super Bowl, like he was so excited. And Bernice had even said that Foose would stand outside the changing room and watch the little girls get dressed, and when she called him out on it, he flipped out. So then Bernice starts talking about how the ransom note ties to her ex-husband and Carruthers. And she started talking about something called the Small Foreign Faction, and it would refer to Carruthers being an alien because countermeasures and tactics would refer to Carruthers working for the CIA once upon a time. Victory would refer to Carruthers actually being from a dimension called Victory from the Kabbalah mystical universe. SBTC stood for Scott Brooke Truth Carruthers. Brooke was a middle name used by Carruthers, and Truth was a word that he used a lot, I guess. And so Bernice hypothesizes that either Fuss and Carruthers, or possibly Fuss and Michael Helgoff, went into the Ramsey home to kidnap JonBenet Ramsey, but she fought back and it got her killed. In one of the diaries that belonged to one of the cult members, it said that Carruthers was in Maryland during Christmas of 1996 when JonBenet was killed, but that doesn't mean that Michael Helgoff and Foose weren't working together. It eventually just kind of cut off, and that's where we were left, so that's all we know. But let me know what you think in the comments, and don't forget the follow button, and tell me your thoughts. All right, bye.